Shana Tova again. Language is a form of telepathy. I can take ideas originating in my brain and transmit them to your brain, and you will then know what thoughts I am having in my own head. I am doing it right now. It's a pretty neat trick. Language-based telepathy, however, has its limits. Dr. Albert Mehrabian famously discovered that language, actual words, are pretty limited as a telepathic form. His work led to the famous 7-38-55 rule, which says that in situations where any emotion might be conveyed, 7% of communication is verbal, meaning using words in a language. 38% is vocal, meaning tone of voice, pitch, and other vocal patterns, and 55% is visual or physical. In the original study, those visual cues were specifically facial cues, but we could analogize to other nonverbal cues, leaning the body in or away or fidgeting. Of course, this breakdown only applied to spoken English, not other spoken or signed languages, but the idea rings true and universal. It isn't just words that matter, but the entire package in which we receive the words. Maybe this is why email and texting are so prone to misunderstandings. They're missing 93% of the cues that we need to fully interpret the communication. Was that comment in that email sincere, or sarcastic, or frustrated? How could you know? We never needed a study to prove this. Just look at the behavior of people wearing masks, attempting to have a conversation. Last week I was in the store and I asked the clerk a question, and she couldn't quite hear me, so she came closer, and I tried again, but she still couldn't quite hear me. So she came a little closer, and I tried again. She still couldn't quite hear me, so she took down her mask to hear me better. It's not just masks which veil our communication. Language itself is a veil. It comes to cover over any uncomfortable silence. I asked some friends about their experiences of communicating without language, and one jokingly said, "I don't understand the question because I talk to fill any silence." But others shared stories of hugs, meaningful looks, working with someone across a language barrier or a communication barrier. We communicate very effectively before we have language as infants. Many of us will need to communicate when language leaves us near the end of our life. Many of us have cared for parents or partners who have lost their faculty with language. We know how much can be communicated across that gulf. During my last visit with my father, several months after he had given up using language regularly, and a few months before his death, my brother clasped his hand across the table like this, just to touch him. My father responded by arm wrestling him with a giant grin on his face. Yes, we heard him loud and clear. He was saying, "I am here, I am strong, I am funny, I can still turn your grief into laughter." And while most of us gain and maybe lose language, some of us communicate without language for our entire lives. We all communicate in sighs, cries, shouts, laughter, groans, and grunts. And I hope we all learned over Rosh Hashanah to krechts a little. We communicate in facial expressions and body language. When we can't see another's body language, when we don't share physical space with them, it's as though we have lost a sense we didn't know we had. I've been talking a lot with teachers lately about teaching virtually. Whether they teach adults or children, they report feeling lost. Am I teaching into the void? Is anyone receiving this? The blank stares of people trying to look attentive, or much worse, the switched off video feed. It certainly doesn't help us feel heard. we try instinctively to bridge the gap between you and me, to take our innermost thoughts and feelings and to beam them into other people. We work hard at it, even when barriers like Zoom rooms and email are put in our way. I notice myself trying to create more animation in my face, more pauses in my natural speech pattern, as I try to beam my words, my innermost thoughts and feelings into your computers and tablets and cell phones. But language is too often inadequate to the task. You know that if you've ever tried to convince a crying baby to stop crying just by using words, even very gently spoken words. And when we are feeling something emotionally profound, we also often simply lack the words. So here I am on Yom Kippur, alone in a sanctuary that seats hundreds. There aren't words to convey the strange silence in this space. To fill a space only with my own words feels so wrong. The soundscape is off. The auditory extremes of these holidays are encompassed in a phrase from Unetana Tokef, Uveshofar gadol yitaka, v'kol dmama daka yishama. A great shofar will blast, and a silent, small voice will be heard. That sound of the shofar is often referred to as tru'ah, which means simply a loudness. But that same word tru'ah is used to refer to enthusiastic human shouting in the Bible as well. Rosh Hashanah is called Yom Tru'ah in the Torah, the day of the sounding of the shofar. But Karaite Jews, who reject rabbinic teachings and whose practices diverged from what became mainstream Judaism over 1,000 years ago, they understand Rosh Hashanah to be the day one goes to synagogue in order to literally shout in prayer. Even for us, who don't usually shout in prayer, the sound of our many voices combined is the human tru'ah, the human shofar. And within a day, usually punctuated by human tru'ah, this day, Yom Kippur, we place so many moments of silent prayer, silent confession, silent witness. Inside of the loudness, we try to find a place of absolute silence within. Our tradition holds a foundational story about the possibilities of communication amidst the sound of the shofar and the sound of silence. In the Torah, Moses speaks regularly with the divine mystery of the universe. Moses somehow never runs out of words. There's one particular conversation between Moses and the ineffable that takes place up on Mount Sinai. Moses is getting ready to receive the 10 Commandments, and stuff is absolutely going wild all around him. There are giant clouds covering the mountain, thunder and lightning, and bizarrely, the sound of a shofar blast filling the air and freaking everyone out. This is the text of Exodus 19:19. Vayhi kol hashofar holech v'chazek me'od, Moshe yedaber, v'ha'elohim ya'anenu v'kol. The voice of the shofar grew louder and louder. Moses spoke, and God answered him in a voice. The term for the shofar's voice and the voice of God's response is the same word, kol. God answered him in a voice. One plain meaning of the verse might be, God answered Moses in God's own voice, audibly, with one assumes actual words. But an equally plain understanding might be, God answered Moses within the voice of the shofar. The shofar blasts, the voice of the shofar, themselves were God's voice, God's response. Another possibility offered by the Midrash is that God responded to Moses in Moses' own voice. This last possibility reminds me of a spiritual practice called hitbodedut. That word means something like making yourself be alone. The practice of hitbodedut is to pray out loud in an unceasing stream of consciousness. When you've run out of things to say, you just keep talking. And if you run out again, you just keep talking. It's a great emptying. It's like pulling the release valve on your subconscious. As it turns out, no matter how inadequate the language, we seem to have an infinite amount of it. What I often find during a session of Hitbodedut is that my own voice provides answers to my own questioning or my heartbreak or my longing. If I talk loud enough, long enough, I provide my own comfort. And the metaphor of God speaking in Moses' own voice seems particularly resonant. When God speaks to Moses in this episode in Moses' own voice, whether God does that or whether God speaks in the voice of the shofar, it's a frightening and overwhelming experience for everyone else. According to one midrash, as Moses began to receive the 10 Commandments, the people gathered around the mountain begged him to stop after the very first letter. It was too much for them to handle. The first letter of the first commandment is the letter Aleph. The sound an Aleph makes is known as a glottal onset. To produce the glottal onset, you can try this at home right now because you're not surrounded by fellow congregants. Try holding your breath for a few seconds and then releasing that breath as a vowel sound. Ah. That's the sound of an Aleph with a vowel, with the vowel ah. Now do it again without making the sound. That's an Aleph. V'shofar gadol yitaka, v'kol dmama daka yishama. A great shofar blasts, and a silent, small voice is heard. On this day, overflowing with liturgical words, chock full of dvarlets and sermons and discussions, can we tune into ourselves at the level beyond language, the level of the Aleph? Can we communicate with our own hearts in that place where the shofar wakes up our souls and the small silence opens up within? I want to invite you to not try to replicate the feeling of Yom Kippur in a big, cavernous sanctuary with a chorus of hundreds as your companion. I'm giving you this advice because I need this advice. Instead, let us find new words and new silences to honor this day. Let's put our faith in the possibility that each of us, in our own homes, is doing the work of connecting across the gulf of silence and space. May we find a new tru'ah, a new prayer worthy of being shouted deep within ourselves. And may we know that our prayers are held in the vast, caressing silence that connects us all. Gemar Chatima Tova. May we be sealed for good in this year to come.